Welcome to Momo Nomo, the home of the happy apostate. I'm Randy C. Watts, and I'm joined by my incredible co-host, Gene Judson. Gene, thank you so much for coming on this morning and being a part of this.
That's right, and I'll simulcast this onto Latter Daily Digest as part of our shows of honoring creators.
Great. That's what I was hoping for. We have a great show today. It's something that caught my eye as I was going through Facebook. I saw Brandon Shumway's Facebook posts, and I was very impressed with his experiences, his attitude, and his story. And he was gracious enough to accept the invitation when I invited him on. So with no further ado, as we say, let's bring on Brandon. Brandon, thank you for being here.
Hey, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, we're so glad you're here. I know, Gene, you have met Brandon actually at Thrive, wasn't it?
Yeah, on January 22nd, 2022, they had a Thrive worldwide kind of a thing. They had like 20 Thrives all throughout the world going on at the same time. And Cara Burrell was there, and let's see, what's his name? The guy that came out at BYU for his valedictorian speech, Matty Easton.
Yeah.
Matt Easton, yeah.
And
Very
Alan
cool.
Mount was there, and I was there, but I wasn't anybody yet at the time. I didn't have a podcast. But
Gene is who I have labeled the connections whisperer, because he knows about everybody in the field of post-Mormon, and he actually knows a lot of Mormons too. So
that's good.
He's handy to have around. Anyway, Brandon, I wonder if you would mind giving us an overall 30,000-foot view of who you are right now, what your situation is, and then we'll kind of go into your story.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess the 30,000-foot view, the kind of thing that makes me interesting what I'm doing right now is I am an active duty lieutenant commander in the U.S. Public Health Service, and I openly practice psychedelic religion. So that includes using cannabis and mushrooms and talking about it openly on a podcast. It's called The Naturalized Citizen. And it's caused a little bit of good trouble. So we're, pushing forward religious freedom in a different kind of way. But all this exploration into spirituality and other ways of, learning about ourselves and expanding our consciousness. It started in, my upbringing in Mormonism. And I guess that's where we come back to you and how I ended up here talking to you today. So
wonderful. So you grew up as an LDS boy?
Yep. I'm 32 out of 32 of my great grandparents all crossed the plains with Mormon pioneers, towing hand carts and all that stuff. Grew up in small town Utah. What's that?
That might be a record. I don't know. Like I have like half of my family is like converts from the early 1900s and then the other half is pioneer heritage. And
people like Newell Knight, like Brigham Young's brother, like, I don't know, just all the way back to the beginning, my people have been Mormon. And so it's even though I'm not a part of the church anymore, I still consider myself, by heritage, I'm still Mormon. So, that was hard for me initially, because of all the stuff I went through kind of as a queer person in the LDS Church. A lot of trauma associated with that. I guess if you want, I could talk a little bit more about what that was like growing up in the church, being queer.
I'd love to discuss that with you. I have 4 kids, 2 of which are gay, and so I'm a huge proponent of the LGBTQ rights and community, and especially as it relates to the Mormon Church.
Yeah, Brandon, how old were you when you first sort of noticed you were different or whatever, and how did you experience that?
let's say like around the time of puberty, I started to just kind of explore things. We had just gotten like a home computer, and I had discovered some gay porn on the internet. And it was interesting because in middle school, we had like that science class where they do like the sex education thing. And I remember my parents went to that, and they were paying attention very closely to the kinds of things they taught. And they came to me and they're like, well, we agree with pretty much everything. It's great that you know how your anatomy works and all this stuff, but there's two things that they're going to teach you that we want you to know are not true. One of them was that masturbation is okay. They're like, it is absolutely not okay. It's sin next to murder and all this stuff. And then they were like, also, homosexuality is a sin. And at this point, my dad's telling me this stuff. I don't think he knew that I had already been masturbating to gay porn. It just wasn't something that they thought, their innocent 12-year-old could have even been into. I was just this curious kid exploring the world, learning about my body, and then suddenly just thrown into this world of intense shame about, who I am and things that feel good. And so that was kind of like very formative kind of time of my life. And it was all around like your sexuality and who you are is not okay. And you need repentance. You need Jesus,
Right. And as a Mormon youth, a young boy, you were interviewed by the bishop every year or a couple of years when it was time to get promoted in the priesthood, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so how did you lie to the bishop, or did you confess? What happened?
I did confess. Like when I did my deacon interview, I talked to the bishop, and they, he pretty much told me, that's bad and that's wrong, and you can repent, you can be forgiven, and as long as you follow the commandments and do everything the way that you're supposed to, God will take that burden from you, and you won't feel like that anymore. And so I was like, oh, great, well, and I believed him.
Pray and read your scriptures and attend your meetings, and everything will be all good.
Pray the gay away.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so obviously you felt this weight on your shoulders of guilt because of who you naturally are. And that's what just kills me, is that so many youth go through this, and some of them don't come out of it, and they end up taking their own lives. And this is a tragedy, and this is horrible that it's going on still in 2026. So did your peers know that that you were gay?
No, and it's not something I talked a lot about. I mean, some of them might have guessed, me just liking, I like wore a purple backpack and did theater, and I don't know, I was in the choir and all this stuff. But I was also trying to like play the role of what a man should be. So I was like, playing football and like trying to act tough, and I tried to date girls, and I actually discovered through that I wasn't 100% gay. There was some bisexuality there, and it was something that made it feel like it would be possible for me. And my frame of reference at that point, I didn't have words like, bisexual or even queer. I was just a heterosexual guy struggling with same-sex attraction. That was our language that we used. And so it was just like this thing I was supposed to overcome. And I thought maybe the more I focused on trying to have a relationship with women, the better that would get. And I would get to this point where I would just kind of go through a series of girlfriends where we would like make out a lot, and then it would arouse real feelings. And I was like, okay, well, now it's scary again. I got to lock it down, shut down the sexuality thing again. And so even heterosexual sex was very, suppressed, and just this evil thing that we're not supposed to explore about our own bodies. And so if the bishop had told you when you first talked to him, if he had told you, hey, that's perfectly natural, that's okay, you are who you are, God made you like you are, would your life have been different growing up? Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, even just to have some sense of like queer identity and be able to like connect with people in my community, because there were queer people around. I didn't think I was like that. I was, on a different path, because that's just not how I saw myself.
Now, I know that my son, I had to actually reach in and pull him out of the closet when he was 14.
Mm.
And my other son waited until he was about 22 before he felt comfortable. He was a returned missionary and very active in the church, and but it's like night and day how happy they are after they come out, and when they can feel like they can be themselves around their friends and family. So I'm glad that you eventually were able to. But please continue. So you're growing up.
Yeah, so I guess just kind of that underlying theme of shame and not feeling like I was good enough, and that if I could just work harder, do more, be better, then I would be acceptable in the eyes of God, in my own eyes. Just kind of this whole self-hating cycle that was driving me to actually accomplish a lot of great stuff. So I was involved in all the extracurriculars. I decided I wanted to be a physician. I got really good grades. I was just tried my best to be this, like, the little Eagle Scout, righteous little Mormon boy. Just tried to do all the things, served a mission.
Do you think that your sacrifice of going on a mission God might bless you with heterosexuality? No, and it wasn't something that I was as focused on then, because I was so focused on the gospel. I just threw myself in, like, I just dove into the deep end, and it wasn't something that, like, I even felt a lot of pain around as a missionary. It was like it was the thing that I was avoiding by throwing myself into the work 100%. I was a true believer, and I was knocking on doors. I was saving people's souls, and that was bigger than any of that other stuff. And where'd you serve?
I was in Nebraska, Spanish speaking.
Oh, wow.
Nebraska.
Cool. I went to Spain, Spanish speaking.
Yeah.
So throughout your mission, do you feel like your testimony remained strong?
It did. Yeah. And I ended up training a lot of missionaries and served in leadership positions. And I felt like I was thriving because I was strictly obedient to God's commandments. And it felt like I was happy. And I really felt like they were like the best 2 years, because I didn't have to think about sexuality. I just shut it all down, and I was just doing God's work, and it felt really good. It felt like I had this sense of purpose, and
you turned it off like a light switch.
Well, I mean, it was still some stuff there in the background, but in essence, it was easier to do because I had this greater sense of purpose, and I could just throw myself 100% into the work that I was doing, and just try not to think about that for a while.
And so people also a successful mission, and that's wonderful. Go ahead, Gene. Sorry.
Yeah, and people also think that if you're gay and you go on a mission, that you will just be attracted to every single strapping young elder, and that doesn't happen with women with heterosexuality. Was that your experience as well? That maybe there was somebody who was cute or here and there, but mostly they were just people.
Well, there was a couple of companions I got particularly close to, and probably started to have feelings that I felt a little shame about, but it wasn't something I would have ever like acted on at that point in my life, and none of them had expressed any of that, so it was just this connection to men, but it was this healthy platonic sort of connection. And I think that's important too. Like it's all about the context that you meet people. Not every person is a potential sexual partner, and the mission actually provides a great opportunity for that sort of thing to make other types of connections with people, and just even random people on the street. You just walk up to anybody and talk to them, and it could be it could be like some 80-year-old retired pastor, or like 19-year-old homeless kid, or like just everybody in between. And that was a beautiful part of the mission. It felt like it was for everybody, and you had this secret knowledge that could save people, and it felt good to have all of the answers to life's big questions.
And were you
So
able to
you-
dial back your masturbation and not have that as an issue, or?
Yeah, I mean, it surged back in off and on, but I think that's normal. So
Of
I don't have the
course.
same shame about it that I used to.
That
But-
whether you're gay or not, that's pretty normal. And
Yeah.
of course, the church nor the members will verify that. They're like, no, I don't do that. I didn't do that. Yeah. And monkeys might fly out my butt, right? So,
Yeah. Well, that just
so
perpetuates that shame cycle and drives you to try to do better and be more obedient and commit yourself to the work even more, because now you feel like you're not worthy, and it drives the whole cycle. Is that shame?
so you served a successful 2-year mission in Nebraska.
Mhm.
So tell us how you ended up with your wife. How did
Yeah.
that happen?
Well, I came back and I was doing school at Utah State University. I ended up majoring in Spanish, actually. Was a medical interpreter for a while there. And just, I met Sarisha. It was a blind date. She's from India, and she had never really dated before because it just wasn't part of their culture. So she identified as asexual. Just wasn't very interested in. It wasn't sure she even wanted to be married or have children, but it was what she was supposed to do as a mission, as a LDS member of the church. So, here I am kind of struggling with sexuality. I was kind of afraid of being with a woman who had like a lot of sexual needs, because it wasn't something that I had a lot of draw to at that time. And so her not having as much of that was a draw. That was like something that actually made it click. So I tell people, like, I'm mostly gay and she's mostly asexual, but we had 3 kids together. We made it work. So it was just.
Was she aware that you were gay? Did you tell her before you were married?
Yeah. Well, and I don't think I framed it that way. It was, again, in the language of, like, I struggle with same-sex attraction, and that's something that I've repented from. And because we were in this belief system where that was just how that worked, and it's like, well, he's righteous now and he's repented, and I did and still do, have some attraction to women, and we thought we could make it work. And we did for a long time. It wasn't.
And she was willing to do that with you. She was willing to take that journey, knowing that you had this SSA situation.
Mhm.
And I'm interested because I actually know a few people who were in the same boat, and they were able to keep that appearance of a regular heterosexual couple having kids in the church for so long. And I actually know one who's still in that situation, and he's freaking almost my age, in his 60s. And he's been miserable for the last 20 years. So I'm glad that you're talking about this, because there are people listening there's going to be a light bulb come on and say, hey, there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. Well, I would say there's light in the tunnel too. Like, it wasn't all misery and sadness. And that's the thing that's really, like, hard about it, is we had this real connection, this real, like, love for each other. And we were there for each other in so many ways. And just because intimacy looked different for us doesn't mean that, like, it was not real intimacy or not real love. Like, it's hard to explain to people who have sex as, like, the center of everything that they do, but there's so much more to human connection than just the sex part. And so it really was an opportunity to explore all of that with another really cool human being who was also on a similar, like, healing trajectory.
I think in your profile, I read that you were in a mixed faith situation. Did she remain a true believing member of the church?
Well, we were in a mixed faith situation for a little while. So I actually ended up leaving the church first. So it was after medical school. I was out in residency at Loma Linda, California. And I had a friend of mine who came out as trans while I was in medical school, and had like reached out about their questions about the church. And at the time, I had like been an elders quorum president. I was like, I got all the answers. I'll help you answer your questions, And I reached out to my friend who was struggling, and they had some really good questions that I didn't have answers to. And so I started looking at, Joseph Smith's polygamy and stuff that was really bothering me. I was like, you know what? You're busy with medical school. You just put that on the shelf. You save that for later. You don't have to have all the answers right now. It's fine. And you just tell your friend you love them, and that's it.
Is
and
that
so
around
I just kind
2015?
Yeah, that was like 2016, I think, was when that first happened. And there was like the church had responded with those gospel topics essays and all of that. And I joined a group called the Waters of Mormon that was active back then. And there was people who were trying to stay in the church. It was like from a faithful perspective, but wanting to discuss those things a little bit more openly than the church was doing at the time. And so I kind of connected with some folks like that online. But the questions just kind of kept getting deeper and deeper until in my intern year. And that was probably not the best time to have a faith crisis when you're in like a medical internship. I was working like 80 hours a week and just was exhausted anyways. And then I wasn't feeling good about lots of things, but then I was just like, and there's these questions I have that are unanswered. I used to be able to just fall back on my faith, when times got hard. And I was like, but can I? There's some things I need to clear up. And so it became like this pressing need to get those questions answered and try to firm up my faith. And it was from that perspective that I initially started studying gospel topics and church history stuff, was to try to strengthen my faith so that it would be easier for me to go through the hard things that I was going through. But deeper I dug, the deeper it got, and just down the rabbit hole I went. So
a very common story. Those who sometimes set out to prove the truthfulness of the gospel start discovering things that actually does the exact opposite. And I'm one of those as well. I decided after a while that it was time that I start looking a little closer at the organization to which I was donating time, talent, and money. I wanted to kind of firm up my testimony as well. And that's when, and now I get it. Now I understand why the prophets have always counseled us not to seek answers to questions we have from anyone but an authority in the church. Because they don't want people using their God-given brains. So and that's a good example of why, is what happened to you, what happened to me. And Gene as well eventually saw the light. So
yeah, Brandon, did you feel like betrayed by the church? Like they could have told you all these things that you were learning during your years of seminary or Sunday school or priesthood meetings?
Yeah, absolutely. I just felt like, how come no one has ever talked about this? Why isn't this something I already knew about? I'd been through, seminary and institute and mission and served in leadership positions in the church, and these weren't things that had ever really been discussed at that point. I think the church is doing a little bit better at talking about those things now. And I think it's kind of a inoculation kind of thing. They have to talk about it because they know that they're losing people like us when they didn't.
They don't have a choice because people are finding out anyway. Thank you to the internet.
Yeah.
Some of the real history made me feel empathy toward the early members of the church. And, like either the Mountain Meadows Massacre or the events in Missouri or Nauvoo, just made me feel that they're human beings, right? Whereas what we were fed was like miracles, right? Everything, and everybody's against the Mormons, right? The anti-Mormons and all these things, and we're just trying to fight against these things that are going on. and then miracles happen, right? And then, you know, Brigham Young says this is the right place, and we just, it's just because they can go to Utah, everything works out, right? And it's just, but more and more, it started to become, they lied to me by not telling me these things. And so I remember hearing a Mormon story with Bishop Sam Pinson in 2020 during the COVID summer. And he said, you know, they lied to me. That's it. I'm out. And I was thinking, you know, people lie all the time. You know, that doesn't seem like a good enough reason. But the more and more I heard things, then I adopted that same sort of feeling. It's like, even if the church is true, but the leaders are just doing it wrong, God should accept that I'm rejecting those deceivers, right?
Yeah.
He should be okay with that. And so that was part of my journey.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that resonates with me too.
And in your marriage, I just want to point out that you created a beautiful family and beautiful children. And the relationship that you have with them is just so admirable. Anyone who looked at your Facebook profile and post would know that you're an incredible dad, despite, you know, the speed bumps along the way. So your wife you were on your journey to finally say, I'm out of here, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you know, the first like heretical thing that I actually did, not just believed, but did, was I started to feel like my tithing was going to some place I didn't want it to go to. And I started to donate it to charity. There was actually a lady from India that we had worked with when we did humanitarian work there, needed a new bore well for this slum community. And I asked, well, how much do you need? And she gave me the number, and it was, when I converted it from Indian rupees into dollars, it was like the exact amount that I would have paid for my monthly tithing. And I was like, it's a sign, you know. I felt really good about like using God's money that way to help, you know, the least among us, and like actually try to help people. And I counted that as tithing. So when I was having my temple worthiness interview, and they said, "Are you a full tithe payer?" I said, "Yes." And the bishop's looking down. He's like, "Well, I don't see that you've actually given anything in tithing. You know, you want to talk about that?" And I said, "Yeah, well, this is what I'm doing, and I feel like that's a full tithe." And they were like, "I don't think that's a full tithe, because that's not how tithing works." And I was like, "Well, God said it was fine."
Well, I think they'd much rather you contribute to shopping malls, to land,
subsidize
ranches,
private education for
weapons of war contracts. Yeah, I think they would much rather you contribute to that than feeding his sheep, if you will.
That's right.
Well, and so while I was going through that, because it was over a series of like multiple interviews, bishop, stake president, back to the bishop, like through that, I was just really wrestling with that concept of like potentially losing my temple interview, because I'm still like kind of a believer at this point. Like I'm still trying to make it work. And I had this moment. We lived about a mile from the Redlands, California temple, and I would run to the temple and back in the morning. That was like my exercise routine. And when I was running towards the temple that morning, I just felt like, you know, I'm going to take a different turn. We're going to go a different way. And I turned out into some orange orchards that were there. I was just running through these orchards, and it was like right when the sun started to come up over the horizon, and I was just thinking about like how I was going to miss the temple and how beautiful that was, and an important part of my life that it had been, these sacred moments where I had felt like I had been in the presence of God and felt that spirit. And when I was like wrestling with that sun broke over, and I just collapsed to my knees, and I just felt like this overwhelming sense of peace, that spirit just kind of confirming all of this is my temple. You know, like I didn't leave Mormonism because I stopped seeing God there. I left because I started seeing God everywhere else. And it was like this
great
faith expansion rather than a faith crisis. And I felt like it was beginning to see that there was more than the LDS Church, not just that LDS Church was bad, because it had been like a relatively good influence in my life, other than the shame and the sexual suppression stuff. But in general, like, I feel like there was a lot of really good things about my Mormon upbringing and my family and everything that helped me to be this like otherwise thriving human being. And so I was trying to honor all of that. And I think it was like Richard Rohr. I don't know if there are people out there who haven't heard of him. He's an amazing Catholic friar. But one of his catchphrases is to, like, real spiritual growth is about including and transcending the previous version of your faith. You have to, you could just reject it and just kind of go the opposite direction. But real growth is where you can include it, honor the good things about it, and more. That's what real growth looks like.
So the church obviously doesn't issue temple recommends when you choose to share your tithing with someone in need,
Mm-hmm.
because that's not what tithing is all about. I get into these constant arguments with people who are still TBMs, who say, I pay my tithing because it goes to help the poor and the needy. And I'm like, no, your tithing doesn't go to help any poor or needy. That's the fast offerings. Your tithing goes to build buildings and to hedge funds to invest, because by 2040, the church is trying to get to $1 trillion, and they're right on track so far. And my big question is, just as a side note, what in the hell are they going to do with all that money? And the church says, well, in more or less in what I've read, the prophets say, well, it's a rainy day fund for the second coming, when Christ comes. And I'm thinking, what is Christ going to be charging you to come down? And for his second coming, it's going to be a price? Yeah. What do they need that money for? So I did the same thing. As a matter of fact, me and my kids, we chose to start giving what we'd pay in tithing to those in need, standing on the street corner or knowing someone who can't make rent. And I felt so much better doing that. Mm. And at that time, I thought my tithing was supposed to be going to help the poor and needy, but I didn't see any evidence of that.
That's right. So, Brandon, if you're paying tithing, that means you're out of school and working now at that point.
So I was in residency, so we are getting a salary during that point, and I was still an officer in the public health service, so I was getting a little more than most residents, but it was 10% was going to help charity after that. And I'd been paying tithing since I was 8, and I didn't want to stop then. So even when I stopped paying tithing to the church, I always wanted to continue paying 10%. Because I really loved what it did for me and the way I looked at money and the way I valued it, and seeing everything as having come from God and all of that. And so I was like, well, I want to do it in a way that feels right to me.
That's awesome. And did Sarisha, did she support you in this?
Well, she was really worried about it, and that's where she started to ask more questions. And she actually did end up leaving the church with me about a year after I did. But it took, her actually having her own questions and needing to face her own stuff. Her story is amazing, by the way. If anyone has not heard her story, she did an interview with Mormon Stories, Sarisha Shumway, and it's very powerful, very incredible, the things that she has overcome in her own faith journey.
Last summer, I think, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, great. I'll have to watch that. Were you part of that interview with John?
No, it was just her. And it needed to be that way because it was her story. And her story is very different from mine, having grown up in India and all of the things that she encountered. It's a very different type of faith transition than mine, where I was kind of born into this. She was kind of stolen from another culture and had to do crazy things like a hunger strike to get away from her parents so that she could serve a mission. And they were like, well, you can choose the mission or the church. She
You
chose the
mentioned
church.
like 24 grandparents, great great grandparents that went across the plains, and I'm betting that she had less than that.
Yeah. Yeah, she was a pioneer in her own way, like
Zero.
in India. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so,
So when we came out of
Well-
the church together, that bound us to each other even more. Like we felt like we had survived, a lot together. That was required a lot of communication, a lot of like talking through. Not everyone makes it out together, and we felt like we were really fortunate.
and what was your medical specialty?
Family and preventative medicine. So it was a dual board certification. So that's more like the public health type stuff and just primary care.
And does that lead into your exploring other ways of healing? Alternative
Yes. So yeah, after finishing, residency in Loma Linda, we moved here to Fresno, California, where I was working for a tribal clinic. So mostly Native Americans, but we're also open to non-natives, where I got to use my Spanish a little bit. And I was not in a great place mentally. Like I felt like I was doing all of the right things, but I just felt like I had gone to a place intellectually where like nothing really mattered. It was just nihilism. I didn't have like a sense of like purpose or meaning anymore. And so and then at that point, I thought it would be a great idea to try to explore things like alcohol, and alcohol just make me sad and depressed. It's all about set and setting though, even with alcohol. If you're drinking at home alone, that can lead to bad, dark places really fast. I actually do still enjoy some alcohol out with friends and just the disinhibition a little bit.
Right.
But it's all about the dose and the context.
Social situation, right?
Yeah.
Just staying at home and drowning your sorrows.
And from a medical context, that's the same with all medicines, all drugs. Like if they're used in the right set and setting and the right context, they can be really good for you. Like coffee is actually pretty healthy for your liver, but like you shouldn't drink it if you're pregnant or if you have like an anxiety disorder, or there's the right people, the right context for different things.
So what caused you to start exploring the hallucinogenic, is it?
Yeah, hallucinogens. Well, so I mean, cannabis was kind of my gateway herb. So I was actually counseling a patient about their cannabis use, and I was like, "You probably shouldn't smoke as much weed." And I was trying to be curious about it, open-ended questions like, "Well, why do you smoke?" And he just asked me, "Well, have you ever tried it, Dr. Shumway?" And I was like, "Well, no." And he's like, "Well, then with all due respect, you don't know what you're talking about." And I was like, I think he's got a point. Like, I really don't, I don't know. And so the first time I tried a cannabis edible, it was for science. I had to experience it. And I went down the medical side of things, doing the clinical trials, looking at is there a role for this as a medicinal thing? And it did seem like it had some potential benefits. And I was like, hey, I'm kind of actually going through a lot of anxiety because I'm struggling and maybe I should try this. So the first day I decided to sit down with an edible, someone told me to watch like a nature documentary, and I pull up on Netflix, Fantastic Fungi. It was actually the one I decided to watch. And it was a religious experience. I was just learning about all the mushrooms and how they're connected with everything. And then they talked about psilocybin and what it's doing for mental health and all this. And I'm high for the first time in my life. And like, I'm seeing all these connections, like with everything that I've been learning in my medical practice and with going through this like faith expansion type thing, but then like ending up in a place where nothing really made sense anymore. And I just felt like this call to like, yeah, I want to experience that too. And it was this curiosity, is like this, like a scientific curiosity. Like I just want to know and I want to experience things. And it was that I ended up signing up with a church out of Utah called the Divine Assembly. And they send you a little grow kit and you can grow your own mushrooms. And I started growing them at the beginning of 2024. 2024, I decided I was going to make the year of plants and fungi. So during that year, every day I would study a different plant or mushroom and like its effects on the human physiology. And it was just this kind of daily ritual. Actually, it felt like a religious ritual where I would learn about a different type of natural medicine.
And my recollection of that documentary was that they go into a little bit about how basically, I don't know, negative forces sort of ended the research that was going on in the 50s and 60s that we could have all benefited from.
Yeah.
And it was like, because there's this gap between the 70s and the 2020s or 10s now, maybe we missed out on a lot of research that we have to do like double our efforts now to catch up in a way to where they were in the 60s even. Yeah.
Well, just in the last decade, there's been this resurgence of like clinical studies and activity looking at psychedelics generally. Psilocybin is one of the more popular ones being explored. One, because it is natural, so it has like that naturalistic thing that appeals to people. And then two, it's also just so accessible. You can grow them in your closet, and like it's very exponentially. It grows very, very rapidly. You take spores, and there's millions of them, and you can just by sharing the knowledge of how to do it, people can have access to their own source.
Now, how would you suggest to someone who was very interested in this? How would you suggest they get into this and maybe even start growing their own? I don't know. Are you familiar with Rob Tobler? Are you a friend of Rob's?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. He's big into it now, and he went through his certification training to be is it mycologist or?
Mycologist is just someone who studies mushrooms. Usually, when somebody's working to like guide people on journeys, there's lots of different certification courses for those kinds of things.
Gotcha. So how does someone get in? Oh, go ahead, Gene.
Yeah. How does someone get into it? About how long does it take someone maybe to be proficient in what they're doing as a beginner?
Well, as far as like exploring it for yourself, I would say join a church, first of all, because like it is still like a Schedule I substance. The auspices under which I'm doing this is the freedom of religion. We do still have the freedom to worship as we will, and as long as it's like sincere belief, I believe that we have the right to explore our own minds. If there's one thing that you have control over, it's that. And the day that it stops being that, we're not really free. So that's the reason why I decided to like start sharing my story openly, was to try to do a little bit of trailblazing for other people, because if it can be done by a physician, an active duty public health service officer, that opens doors for other people to feel comfortable exploring it for themselves too. And I do think that this is the future of like mental health, because it's accessing our own intuitive knowledge. You become your own healer. You're seeing your own problems from a different perspective that escapes from this default mode network. Default mode is just what we're in most of the time, and the connections that we make, the way we see the world, but it just kind of melts away when all the serotonin, starts, all these receptors start being activated. It starts to just open your mind to other possibilities. And then you can write your own story once you have that blank page. They have like step-by-step instructions how to grow your own, but also there's a community of people who share their experiences and support one another. And it's just this grassroots effort to like support one another in doing this work for ourselves. And that's
Randy,
what's so powerful about it.
Randy, you're going to find some religion?
Oh, we have one here in Spokane, and
Okay.
my Amanda and I, we have seriously considered attending, just so that we can get into it and get that start. I took my first mushroom trip about 3 months ago, and it was such a peaceful feeling. It was just enough to where I was looking at things through a different light. But what I wanted to ask you was, Gene and I grew up in the 60s. We're both the same age. And there was such a heavy presence of hippies and the peace movement. Do you think that the hallucinogenic drugs or the cannabis had a lot to do with their attitudes against war and violence,
Yep.
and let's bring in peace.
Yep, that's why they made them illegal, because we can't just have people loving each other. You got to have war. You got to feed the industrial machine. It's really hard to I think if people were doing mushrooms, no one would want to blow stuff up, or people war just would be very difficult to have once you recognize that we are all the same, and you just don't want to cause harm to other living beings. It just doesn't seem appealing at all. And that's a spiritual thing. Once you're connected to other people at that level, it's not, it changes the world.
It's all about love.
Yeah. And what's cool about that for me is it feels very much like the genuine spiritual experiences that I had when I was in the church. When you're connecting with that source that's greater than yourself, and it gives you this sense of purpose and meaning, it's the same thing. It's just something that you're able to have for yourself. You don't have to trust the authority of some other person who's going to tell you what God wants for you. You're directly tapping into your own higher self, or this unique version that is you, and the authority is within you. You're the authority.
Did the paths of this study and your medical studies cross at any point? And were you able to help your patients by recommending some of these
natural
hallucinogenic,
remedies?
Natural, yeah.
Well, in California, most of my patients are already using cannabis. So it presented an opportunity to talk about that in a more informed way, help people use it in a way that was more intentional, more therapeutic. So that was very helpful. Psychedelics are not, the only one that is currently legal is ketamine. And I did have the opportunity to start prescribing that for some of my patients. But there's very limited opportunities to discuss other psychedelic use in a professional context. And I try to keep those boundaries very, very clean because of what I'm doing publicly, to make sure that this is all coming from that religious perspective and not a professional thing that I'm trying to and I'll just make that disclaimer here too. This is coming from me as a person who experiences these things as a religious and spiritual experience, and not as a physician saying that this is something that you should do. There's lots of people who shouldn't probably use mushrooms. Like I said, it's set and setting. Coffee's not the best for pregnant women and anxious people. If you have issues like determining what's real, if you have ever had schizophrenic episodes or mania, may not be a great thing for you to be exploring psychedelics. So there's definitely being in a setting where you have access to medical professionals who are informed about this kind of stuff is helpful. But it's also just something that we have the right to do, regardless of the risk other people see. So,
about what year did you start your podcast?
So that was just last year. It's almost a year ago. I launched it on Bicycle Day, which was the day LSD was first experienced in an intentional way. That was April 19th. So that was last year.
LRB, did you say?
LSD.
LSD.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of other psychedelics that I've explored as well, but
so we'll have a link to your channel. What's your channel's name again?
Yeah, The Naturalized Citizen. Yeah. It just started as my integration journals, different experiences that I would share on there, and the idea was just to share that this is the genuine religious experience, and a lot of it does bring in some of my Mormon history. There was one trip I decided to do a mushroom journey to a background of instrumental LDS hymns to try to bring up some of the feelings and things and work through some of the trauma that I had in church. And there was this really powerful moment where I was sitting in my bed, and that song, Come, Come, Ye Saints, came on, which I just so strongly, associate with these pioneer ancestors of mine. And it just felt like they were all gathered around me and around the bed there. And I mean, they were pioneers. They left everything that they knew to go and explore this thing that they felt was true. And for me, I also felt like I connected with them in a real way. Like I am a pioneer in my own way. I'm a modern day Mormon pioneer. We're pushing beyond to some new frontier. We're trying to create a Zion of a different type. But it still feels very Mormon. And I was able to like reconnect with them and feel Mormon again, you know, in a different kind of way. But it was, I'll never be a member of that church again, but I'll always be Mormon. And making peace with my ancestors was an important part of that for me.
From what I understand and from what I've read, you're working on a book about 365, 365 different plants and fungi, right? Is that correct?
Yep. That's right. Yeah. I was basically just trying to recreate the people. What's that?
A plant a day is all I ask.
Yep. It's trying to recreate that kind of daily ritual experience I had in 2024. Because I think that it's useful not to see all these plant and fungi medicines in the greater context, because it's not just about psilocybin, it's not just about cannabis, but when you start to see those things next to things like cumin and tomatoes and like stuff that we eat every day, you know, in addition to, you know, like herbal medicines like chamomile and like lavender, and how do these things interact with our body and how can we use them intelligently to like improve our health? And
I love that.
It started as like a really intellectual sort of exercise. Like it was very much in like the cognitive realm, and I'm using the doctor side of my brain, talking about clinical studies and chemicals and mechanisms of action. And then there was this like slow transition as I'm using these plants, how it shifts from being all up in my head about things to being like, well, we do have a very limited understanding about this one, and start reflect on like the spiritual aspect of it, or like the relationship with the plant or with the medicines in it. And it really changed the way that I think about medicine just generally, as being like a relationship with these medicines instead of just like this prescriptive process. Like the psychedelics in particular just kind of flipped everything on its head for me as far as the authority stuff goes, both for medicine and for spirituality, because now you're the one in the driver's seat. You're listening to your own body in a way that you never have before, and you understand that you're actually the one in charge of your own health. And that includes your mental health and your spirituality. You are the one who gets to decide. And
that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. It's a game changer.
So is this something that you think, I know it's you're working on the manuscript. Do you think you're actually going to publish this book?
Yes, actually I got to go on a cruise. I met some really cool folks in the psychedelic world. If anyone's familiar with like Paul Stamets, it was actually one of the guys on that Fantastic Fungi documentary that I was first introduced to mushrooms by. I met him on this cruise, and he offered to help connect me with a publisher when it's finished. So I do expect it to kind of go that way.
Oh, that's great.
I'm kind of waiting to see what happens with this. I'm still kind of fighting the legal battle for my religious freedom, you know, with the Public Health Service, and trying to see where that's going to go. But yeah, at some point when that kind of reaches its culmination, there's this book coming out, and I was also a part of the shooting of a documentary about mushrooms and spirituality, where we actually do mushrooms on camera. So,
oh, great. Well, I'll tell you a couple of things. Number one, you got to meet Chelsea Handler, right?
Yeah.
She was on the cruise.
Yeah, that's a funny story, actually. I didn't really interact with her that much until one of the last nights, and we were upstairs on the deck in a party, and I went out to use the head, and she had forgot to lock the toilet. So that's when I first met Chelsea Handler, was on the toilet.
You know, I know that didn't bother her, but I really like Chelsea. And another thing I was kind of intrigued with were the drops of God.
Oh, yeah.
What was that comprised of?
Well, it said on the label that it was a psilocybin extract, but God only knows.
Right? I know you were a little hesitant
Yeah.
to try it. You lick
Yeah.
it off the back of your hand, I understand.
Yeah. It was just these concentrated, drop looking things. I mean, in retrospect, it could have been LSD because it did seem like it lasted longer than your typical psilocybin experience. And then just like mechanistically, it's hard to get like a really concentrated psilocybin extract to be like that strong in those small of doses. So yeah, that would be my best guess as to what that was.
I see Gene frequently licking the back of his hand.
Oh yeah.
And I thought he was licking food off of there, but now I'm starting to wonder.
No.
Usually leftovers.
I wanted to talk to you also, or just mention the documentary that you spoke of
Mhm.
is what helped me understand the earth so much better.
Mm.
That's what helped me understand that the earth is kind of a spiritual being with this interconnectivity under the ground, that
Mhm.
these fungi communicating with the trees and supplying them with what they need.
Yeah.
And it's such an incredible process. If can you just touch on that? What's going on under the ground that we don't see?
Yeah. Well, I guess in that documentary they talk about the mycelial network, which is just this interconnected web of fungi that communicate different things about what's in the soil. They take nutrients from one place to another to just support life as a whole in the forest. And it's this beautiful like connection of all those living things together. There's like 90% of plants that like have fungi inside of them that are helping to inform it about all the nutrients that it's extracting from the soil. The only ones that don't have that are basically the ones that we've created to be like resistant to fungicidal sprays and stuff. It's very artificial. But a lot of the medicines that we get from foods are produced by the fungi that grows inside of the plants. And I think that's a fascinating part of that.
It's a symbiotic relationship that's
Yeah.
just astounding.
Yeah. Well, and then you start to recognize, well, everything is a symbiotic relationship, like I am a symbiotic relationship with like hundreds of billions of microorganisms living in my gut, and they're all eating what I eat and producing chemicals that change my nervous system depending on what's in them. And what's coming in is dependent on like how we're treating, the animals that we're consuming, or how we're harvesting the plants, what kind of sprays and inputs we're putting onto our produce. And it's all this interconnected web, and there's all these signals that we just don't even think about. As I got really into like studying plant medicines and all these different signals that they were sending, it started to feel less and less like something I could process cognitively, and it ended up being like this more intuitive type thing. And that made me think like, well, that's where that spirituality piece comes in again. I know for a lot of post-religious folks, it can be hard to talk about things that are spiritual. But if I can bring back Richard Rohr, another one of his, beautiful quotes is trans-rational. We don't want spirituality to be an irrational thing where we don't have evidence to support our beliefs. But there is something beyond what we can explore with our cognitive mind. There's also this intuitive sense of things that are beyond what we can articulate, something that we feel. And it's okay to honor that part too. There's so much more happening than what we are like consciously aware of. There's so much in our subconscious that's taking in all this data from everywhere around us and incorporating that all into this signal, which is a feeling. And it is important to pay attention to that still small voice inside. That was one of the beautiful things that I took away from Mormonism, was when you really listen to that voice, it's your conscience. It's these intuitive this intuitive sense of like what's right and wrong. And if
Because we
people would
get
listen to that a little bit more,
we get inputs that we're not even aware of a lot of times, and our subconscious can help guide us through those things. But yes, listen to your inner voice, but don't discard rationality.
yeah. And you can have both. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
Right.
I personally believe that there's a creator. I have not lost that belief. I just don't know who or what it is anymore, having left the church. I thought I knew it all, you know?
Yeah.
But once I left the church, I realized, pardon my French, but I don't know shit. I am learning all over again. And when you watch a documentary like this, what was it called? Was it Magic Mushrooms?
Fantastic Fungi.
Fantastic Fungi. When you watch something like that, I don't know how anyone can not believe in something that created this magnificent structure of an earth that learns and distributes their goodness to mankind. And it blows me away. And I'm so glad we have you on. And I wanted to also ask you, do you think that the legalization of these plants is imminent? Do you think that there's a chance?
Absolutely. I don't think that there's any putting these things back in the box, both from like a scientific perspective, like the evidence is just rolling in that these are things that are going to be of benefit to humanity, generally speaking. But particularly, I think the religious like part of that and how that's going to bring things like spirituality and medicine together. Every other culture throughout all of the history of humankind has had spirituality and medicine combined. We've taken care of people's spiritual health. And our, rationalist, postmodern world, we just want to like focus on the materialist side of things. And that's why medicine feels so cold and distant. It doesn't mean that we lose that evidence-based structure that has made, all these great advancements in the modern era. But if we can include the human side of it as well, as like AI and these things start to take over more and more, it's going to be easier and easier to get the correct multiple choice answer. But that's not what really constitutes health. And trying to really have that relationship with yourself and with those around you, with your community, with the foods that you eat, with all of these things, it's going to be so much more obvious why that's important to our health. And it's not just the absence of disease. But yeah, this holistic view of how all of that is connected.
One of the most spiritual groups that I know of, Brandon, are the Native Americans. And I know for how many centuries have they used the peyote. And I could be wrong, but when they talk about smoking the peace pipe, I don't know if there's something to do with some type of hallucinant. I'm sorry, I'm having
probably,
a hard time.
Tobacco is probably one of the ones that they talk about with the peace pipe a lot. And tobacco is actually its own kind of medicine. Obviously smoking cigarettes is really bad for your health, and you shouldn't do that. But one of the things that they talked about in the Indian Health Service when I go to these medical conferences is not that we shouldn't have tobacco or that tobacco is bad. It's to keep tobacco sacred, to use it in a way that opens the door to the spiritual realm. That's what these Native American traditions and rituals had used it for. It wasn't, no one's doing these rituals 20 times a day and filling their lungs with soot. It was this very intentional practice of like opening themselves up to a different way of thinking about the world or reflecting on things that were happening and relationships. And so just engaging with a plant medicine, we don't think of them as like good or bad inherently. It's how you use them. It's the intentions behind what you're doing and the frequency of use and like, I guess what you're going to do with it. Because it's not just one thing. It's just activating a different part of your brain. And then what you do with that is totally up to you. It's like a blank canvas. You can write your own story and do it however you want.
Context. It's context again.
Yeah.
I know that addiction is certainly subjective, but are some of these plants addictive? I mean, I've smoked weed for a long time. I finally stopped because I'm a cougher and it makes me cough too much. So I turned to drinks, the little drinks you can get with 100 milligrams or whatever you happen to take. But the reason I do it is not to get high. My tolerance went way up. So I knocked off weed for a year, but now I'll do drinks just on the weekends because it helps me sleep, relax, and rest. I get such a good night's sleep when I have a little bit of that. But I know people who have told me that they're addicted to weed, and for me to give it up was no big deal. It's just I take it for the benefits of sleep rather than getting high, because I really don't get high much anymore.
Yeah. Well, so what I'll say about cannabis in particular is that, we have an endogenous cannabinoid system. So like the most common G-coupled protein receptor in our entire body is CB1, which is the receptor that THC binds to. But it's usually activated in our bodies by chemicals that we produce naturally. So like when you exercise and you feel good afterwards, you get that like runner's high. That's actually a chemical that scientists have labeled anandamide. And that's something that we make from inside that binds to the same receptor and is doing a similar type of thing. And the reason it does that is to provide the context for the other neurological inputs. So, for example, if you woke up sore the next day, you would be like, oh, it's because I went running, because you have that contextual clue and your body is sensing that that's a good sore, that's a good pain. But if you woke up sore without that context, you would be like, oh, I'm achy and sick. And it's the same sore, but the context of it is different because of these chemical signals being sent. So there are negative consequences of abusing cannabis. So like if you were just doing dabs all day, every day, you're gonna like override your body's natural ability to read those types of contextual signals, and it will just always be in a state of like that openness, and it will be hard to get that same type of input without cannabis. So some people will use it for anxiety, and if you overuse it, so like the vapes are a really interesting one because they're quick. You can puff on them whenever, and you just keep coming back to it. So even if it's not physiologically addicting, it's very addicting to feel bad or to feel anxious and to be able to just reach for the vape pen and to use that. So that can be a very habitual use type thing that prevents people from developing the type of skills to deal with that anxiety. So in that way, it can like mask symptoms of disease rather than curing it. So there's like ways to like use it more intentionally with the goal of healing your endogenous cannabinoid system rather than just covering up symptoms. Because that's a lot of what like Western medicine does is just covers symptoms instead of treating the underlying cause. But when you're using the medicines in the proper context and with an understanding of what's the root cause and how are we addressing that, then it becomes a therapy. It's a medicine. It's something that will help restore balance in people's lives rather than put their lives out of balance. And that's lots of substances will do that. The classical psychedelics like mushrooms and LSD and peyote and ayahuasca, these are not addicting at all. In fact, if you've done them, some people have a very challenging experience with it, and it's not something that's very rewarding in that sense. But it actually has anti-addictive qualities. So it's been studied to help people who have other types of addiction to stop doing those things, even smoking cessation, or like people with a history of alcohol abuse. Using psilocybin is one of those things that can help people turn their lives around for the better because it has these anti-addictive qualities. It kind of erases those entrenched default mode networks that we get stuck in.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we have benefited from your incredible knowledge and experience. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate you coming. Jane, is there anything that you'd like to present before we let Brandon go?
All I can say, like you often say, we're able to get good guests like Brandon because of people liking and subscribing and sharing. Sharing is caring. So if you've made it this far, share this message with a friend, and it'll help our channel grow, and you can help a friend out at the same time.
Absolutely.
And there's probably other subjects we could bring Brandon back on to, like, narrow a focus, like just talk about mushrooms or just talk about some other things, or, you know, that we can bring you back sometime soon.
Oh, of course, we could go on. I could go on for the rest of the day talking about this stuff because it's so intriguing to me. But Brandon, we thank you so much. I admire and respect you a great deal for discovering your own spiritual journey and following it. And I think there's so many that would benefit from doing the same thing. We're going to say goodbye, but if you just stay on after we do, that would be great. Okay.
Sounds good.
So I'll end the show. Thanks again. Thank you, Gene, for being here. And we'll bring more great information to you as we go. Thanks, everybody, for watching.